Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode with Raf King. Yeah, and of course, with Tango here. Yeah, we're giving you some education. Today, though, we're talking about trigger points. Yeah, trigger points, otherwise known as knots. And we've all experienced this before. We've all felt a knot. We've all had some kind of adverse reaction to a knot before. Maybe even if you didn't really connect it to the knot. We've all felt this before, right? And plenty of like really obvious knots for us. Like if you reach up on top of the shoulder right here, you're gonna feel like a very palpable nodule, right? And normally what accompanies this very palpable nodule in the muscle is some kind of pain that comes with it, right? And oftentimes it's really tender when you press into it, but also, and this is where trigger point gets to be really important for the massage therapist to understand, is that these knots can send referral pain, right? So it can hurt in my shoulder, but it can cause me a headache. It can hurt, in my calf, or I can have a knot in my calf, but it could really be sending pain up to my low back, something like that, right? And it's these different types of referrals that make it so important for the massage therapist to understand. Because if I'm working in an area that hurts, what if that isn't the cause of the pain, right? It's still good to work in that area because it hurts, but what if there's some kind of underlying cause that I need to be aware of? Now, the good news about these knots is that Dr. Janet Travell, who was the physician to JFK, went through and did an amazing job mapping out all these knots throughout the body. And that's the really cool part about being able to map it out, is it showed that it was predictable in some sense and reproducible. And this makes it a lot easier for the massage therapist to understand these knots, right? You can get to know certain pain referral patterns by studying this. It's not just random. You're not going to have to guess every time. You're not going to have to figure it out every time. Now, I'm sure there's some differences from person to person, but you aren't going to get stuck in a scenario where this knot on the shoulder sometimes goes to the head, and sometimes goes to your glutes, and sometimes goes to your fingers, and sometimes it goes to your knee. That's not necessarily the case. Most time, knot on the shoulder here is going to refer up to the head. And they can actually get rather specific with these types of pain patterns, meaning, a certain knot might cause... He's so distracting sometimes. He's so cute, but so distracting. I was in the middle of an amazing thought, and he's like, "No, I don't care about trigger points. I just want pads." Yeah, that's all Tango ever wants. But what the point that I was trying to make, though, is it can be very specific, reproducible, and predictable in that sense. Trigger point in and of itself is not normally considered a modality that you would just strictly practice. Like, there's not many people who are going to get a trigger point session. You're going to get a massage, and they're going to practice trigger point in it. And it's normally going to be combined with other modalities, right? So I might use my Russian massage and then focus on a trigger point. I might, in the middle of my structural integration session, absolutely bulldoze over some trigger points, right? And I might recognize that as I'm moving through. Even in a Swedish massage, I think there are times that you can stop and work some trigger points, work some knots. Some of the biggest mistakes I see when working with trigger points, though. So oftentimes what you're going to do, you're going to find that knot and you're going to press into it. You're going to give it some direct pressure. Now, for those of you who have done massage for quite some time, you can recognize when the tissue reaches that point, when it's not giving anymore and it's going to give you a little bit of resistance, and you basically want to like settle at this pressure right here. For those of you who aren't savvy enough to have recognized that yet, trust me, with enough palpation, you'll totally get there. You absolutely will. But the biggest mistake I see when working trigger points is, and this pops up in school with new students, and I don't know where it came from or why it started, but I've noticed that they'll get to that perfect pressure, right? They'll press down into the knot, and they'll feel that resistance, and they'll be there. And then for some reason, something in their mind tells them to just push right past that, right? Like they found the perfect pressure where this muscle is going to be able to release, it's going to be able to relax, and then they push deeper into it. And yes, sure, you could probably work a trigger point this way, right? You can have some effectiveness, but the issue being is you're causing a pain response. Now, what is also fundamental about these trigger points is they can cause other trigger points. right? So if I send pain somewhere else, right? Let's take the scalenes here, for example. The scalenes will send pain down to the chest and down the arm, sometimes even mimicking a heart attack. Like, we'll get to that in a second. But now let's say that it does send pain down to my chest. That is a stimulus. That's a trauma right there for that area of the muscle. That in turn can create a knot and send pain elsewhere, which can in turn and you can just create this vicious cycle of creating knots, creating trauma throughout the body. I think he's got something to say. It looks important. No, we're waiting. No, okay. And so, yes, it's going to be a little intense as you work these trigger points, but we're not trying to create another trauma response, right? We're trying to help the body. This is also why it's important to understand where this can originate from, because there's a difference between like a key trigger point, the real agitator, and say a satellite trigger point, which is the product of the agitator, right? Knowing which one is the real culprit of the situation is going to help you with your work, help you with your time management. Now, I briefly crossed over something there, right? Knots in my neck can hurt my chest and send pain down my arm. That sounds like a heart attack, right? Now, that being said, if anybody does come into you, I'm talking to massage therapists out there, and they're like, I've been complaining about this pain in my chest and down my arm. Our first thought isn't going to be, well, I should be working trigger points. I mean, I should say this. If it's an emergency, go to the friggin' hospital. Like, do not go to your massage therapist. Now, if it's like, well, I've been feeling like this tightness, right? I've been kind of tightness in my chest, tightness down my arm. It's been there for about a week. It really hasn't, I haven't keeled over because of it. Then yeah, you can start thinking about like, is that microphone in the way? You can start thinking about, trigger points in the scalene muscles or something like that. Now, again, I just want to reiterate, if you feel like you're having an emergency, do not call your massage therapist. Go to the hospital, find a doctor. As much as I want to be involved with your healing process, don't call us when it's an emergency. There are, scopes and limitations to what we do. And at the end of the day, you have to really decide what's going to be most appropriate for that scenario right there. Now, I do want to come back to this idea, though, of like, it could be one thing or it could be another when it comes to trigger points. I particularly find with headaches that trigger points are overlooked in certain muscles, right? So the traps, they're really big for like headache management. Like most massage therapists go directly towards the traps. And when I say traps, I mean like this big diamond muscle on your back here that encompasses your neck, your shoulders, and even goes down your back. But most of the time we focus on through the shoulders here for headache management. Now, the only issue I have with that is it's incomplete. In fact, when you look at the SCM here, right, the sternocleidoid mastoid muscle, sternum clavicle mastoid, it says its attachments there. That guy is actually responsible for 8 out of the 10 headaches, different types of headaches that you can get, while the traps are going to be responsible for 6 out of the 10. So we're going to see some bleed over. We're going to see some kind of like overlapping fields of pain referral zones. But I've always found it amazing that the SCM is basically involved with almost every type of headache, a patch of the head that could have, that could produce a headache for you, and it's rarely worked. I don't know how many sessions I've been in where I've worked the SCM muscle here, and someone says, I've been getting massaged my entire life, and no one has ever worked that. Like that's completely unacceptable to me. The fact that there are massage therapists out there only working one half of the segment, just the back of the neck and not the front, that does a total disservice to you, to the client. I mean, I'm not going to go to somebody who's purposefully not thorough with their work, especially when it plays such a huge role in what I'm trying to accomplish. Let's keep this in mind too. SCM fibers here affect a lot of different movements in the neck, a lot of different positions of the neck. So really, anytime we're working the neck, we do want to try to work the SCM muscle. Now, that being said, I've also had clients who aren't comfortable with the front of their neck being worked, whether it's too sensitive, whether they're victims of domestic violence. Like, we do have to be open to the feedback from this client. But I'd say this, I would rather be conscious of working this area and want to work it than just totally ignore it at all. Like, if somebody isn't having a good time as we're working this muscle, yeah, we can switch it up. We can do a stretch. We can go lighter. We can forget about it altogether. But purposefully ignoring it, right out of the gates is not the answer. And if you are a massage therapist and you have not gotten into working this muscle here, please change your tactics, learn how to work it, and of course, learn how to work the scalenes as well. Both these muscles in the neck, wildly overlooked. But I digress. Let's get back to some trigger point work here. In fact, if you want to check out Dr. Travell's, books, she has 2 volumes on trigger point work. And these are basically considered like the holy text of trigger point. So I would actually recommend that you get those books. I'd recommend you check them out, get very familiar with these different knots and their pain referral zones. They even sell posters. So if you don't want to learn them, you just want to be able to refer to them instead. You can hang them up in your office and kind of give yourself a little cheat sheet. I promise that information will come quickly to you once you start to learn it, start to practice with it, start to work with it. It's not going to seem so foreign to you. A lot of the times when you're getting into the practice, it can seem like so overwhelming because there's, these specific ways that this pain is moving through the body. Trust me, it comes very quickly. The only thing that I would recommend is that you try to take some time to practice your touch. I've had people fall asleep while I was doing trigger point therapy. And I'm not talking about like trigger point of like the back of the shoulders. Oh yeah, you're going to be in my shot there, buddy? Tango. We're working here, man. I'm talking trigger point of like the SCM, the subscap, the psoas, all right? I was able to have, my fingers like this deep into somebody's abdomen and have them fall asleep while I was working trigger points. My point being, with enough finesse and with enough attention to detail as you work, really honing your skills with your touch, you can do some really incredible things. And you can really take this practice to a new level because everybody has knots. Everybody. One thing I did cross over here. Why do they happen? Why do we get knots? Well, they're for a number of reasons. It could be something as simple as dehydration. Overuse of a muscle. You're doing a repetitive movement the same way every time. You might not have the right minerals, electrolytes in the body. Because thinking about this, a knot is basically just a permanent contraction of a muscle. Permanent, because of course we can undo it. But it's taking some of those muscle fibers and it's contracting them into just in that one spot. Not the entire muscle is contracting, just that right there. And believe it or not, it does take energy to relax the muscle. It does take ATP, right? Of course, it takes energy to contract, but it also takes energy to let those muscle fibers release. And sometimes there can be a set of muscle fibers that don't get the message, don't have the energy to do it. Now, beyond that, another thing that I need to cover, I'm so happy that some of this got rolling in my head here. Another thing that I do need to cover is when not to work trigger points, right? Most of the time, you see a trigger point, you work a trigger point. Because most of the time, knots aren't helping the body. Most of the time, knots are inhibiting our movement, but there are a couple of times where knots are going to help. This isn't really talked about too much in the massage field, but trigger points can also try to save the body or help the body. So let's take this for example. Let's say that there is a dislocation, right? Dislocation of the shoulder. One of the most easily dislocated joints in the body. This glenohumeral, the shoulder joint, right? So the GH joint. I could see it in my head. It's just not coming out. So when there's a dislocation, let's say it's the GH joint right here, pops out. Now all the muscles that cross this joint right here are going to tighten up. They're all going to cause trigger points, right? They're going to tighten up. They're going to try to hold that joint in place. They're going to try to save the limb, right? Now, when I hear something like this, that there is a recent dislocation of the shoulder, I really don't like to do a lot of intense trigger point work. I might do a little bit, but even then, it's a contraindication. What we really need to do is we need to be looking at exercises. We need to be looking at how we can strengthen this. Why did it come out in the first place? Was it an impact? Was it just that the muscles around it weren't strong enough to support it? I mean, there have been people who have dislocated their shoulder sleeping on their side at night simply because the muscles weren't strong enough to hold it in place and it slipped right out. So with that in mind, they wouldn't necessarily need deep massage. They would need exercises that would help strengthen that area. Now, on kind of like a less of a degree of danger, Our body will create knots when there is a total imbalance in posture and total imbalance in, well, balance, right? So let's take a look at the forearm right here. This is really common for massage therapists, and we're constantly gripping. So the flexors, this big fatty part of the arm right here, is constantly working, right? We're constantly doing with that. And even when we do our workouts and our training to strengthen the forearm, so much of it is grip, 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 flex, 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 flex. And there's not enough extension. So what begins to happen is we get these gnarly knots on the backs of our arms right here, on the extensors right here. And what's trying to happen is your arm wants to like close and your body wants it to balance and open. So it's very naturally going to create tension in the opposite direction. So it has some kind of stimulus to work with. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't work these knots back here. You should. But I've had people really focus on these knots and totally skip the flexors of my forearm, which are causing the knot on the opposite side. So be aware of that. It really just brings us back to that conversation we were having earlier about the Scm muscle versus the traps. If the Scm is bringing my head forward and my traps are creating knots, well, those knots are probably in response to the forward head position, right? It's trying to pull your head back. Keeping in mind that how the neck is set up, it's crazy how we've gotten this far, because our heads are huge compared to our necks. So our heads basically balance on C1. And it's like it's almost like a bowling ball that's like balanced on two fingers right here. So our bodies are very much in tuned to wanting to keep that balance. And this is why some knots form. So in other words, yes, trigger point can be a very simple modality, but at the same time, it does take some critical thinking and should absolutely be involved with all your other styles of massage. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Thank you for hanging out with Tango and excusing his absolutely rude behavior by walking in front of the camera and asking me for pets in the middle of an educational video. But I think we'll keep him around for a little bit. Well, I still got you. Check out my book. It's on Amazon right now. You can head to the website and it'll take you directly there. And I will go ahead and see you in the next video. Thanks for hanging out. We'll catch you all next time and have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful day.